today is that this religious impulse, this need for religion, this need to understand why we are here today and what we must be doing and where we're going, it's always been there, okay? In fact, religion is what makes us fundamentally human. And to prove this case, I'm going to talk about Ice Age cave paintings. So I asked you to look at these cave paintings that we found all around the world, okay, that go back 30,000, 40,000 years. And as you can see from those pictures, they're beautiful, right? And they're extremely creative, artistic. And so I want to look at 3 questions about the cave paintings today. First of all, how were they painted? They didn't have the technology we have today, so how did they paint these cave paintings? Second question is, why did they do this? Because when you're in a cave, it's very dark, it's very cold, and it's very hard to breathe. But they spend days in there painting them. So why did they do that? Okay, that's the second question. The third question is, and the hardest question is, what do these cave paintings represent, or what do they mean? So the first caveat, the first thing I want you to be aware of is that there's absolutely no agreement on any of these questions. Cave paintings is something that we have a lot of around the world, but there's very little evidence as to what they are, what they represent, and how they were painted. So there are a lot of guesses, okay? And the case that I will present to you today is my own personal interpretation based on my research and my understanding of the evidence. But please be aware that there are many different interpretations, and the evidence is extremely unclear about many of these things, okay? So let's start. The first thing you need to understand is that for most of human history, it's been very cold, okay? So the Ice Age only ended about 12,000 years ago, and we've seen a general warming of the planet, which has allowed us to adopt agriculture. But before then, we're basically living on a very cold planet. Now, the history of humanity is this. 300,000 years ago, we came into being in Africa. But because the world became very cold about 100,000 years ago, that meant a scarcity of resources. And that forced us to seek food and resources elsewhere. And so that drove our movement into Europe, which then drove our movement into Asia, and then across the Bering Strait, remember, because this is all ice, right? Into North America and into South America. And then from Asia, we went down to Australia, okay? So we basically colonized the planet. But there weren't that many of us. There was only about 1 million of us all around the world 20,000 years ago. And the other thing to remember is that in this process, there were actually other human beings in other places. So the Neanderthals were here, the Nesovans were here. And we interbred with them until we became the dominant human species, okay? Okay, so does that make sense? All right, so that's the background. Now, let's look at some cave paintings. Because this is in the Chauvet cave, and this started about 30,000 years ago. So these cave paintings were a continuous process where different people at different times went to the caves and painted different pictures. They might have added more things to the pictures as well, okay? But as you can see, this is clearly representing animals, right? Bisons, rhinoceros. The other thing that's interesting about these paintings is that there's really no focus, okay? You see lions, you see horses, you see rhinos, okay? It's almost like nature is one interconnected picture, okay? These are lions, Okay. This is Lascaux cave about 20,000 years ago, and a very famous artist, Pablo Picasso, actually was invited into one of these caves, and he said that, wow, we learned nothing in 10,000 years, meaning that they were just as good back then as they are today. Artistically speaking, humans have not improved at all. Okay? So these are horses. Okay? This is Altamira, Spain, which goes back to 34,000 BCE. And you can see that they're not looking for a realistic depiction of animals, okay? They're trying to imagine the natural world in their own way. Okay, so now the question then is, okay, how did they paint these pictures? So first of all, they mainly use red and black. Okay? Red came from ochre, which is a type of clay, and black comes from charcoal. Okay, so that's the coloring they used. Inside a cave, it's very dark, so they had to use lighting. Okay, so what they did was they got some animal fat and put fire on it. Okay, so they could see some of the caves, but not all of them. Okay, and then so now the question is, why did they paint these pictures? And a lot of the clue is this. A lot of the clue is where we found these paintings. And we found these paintings in a very special place in the cave. We found these paintings in the cave, the section of the cave where the acoustics was the best, the sound was the best. So what this means is we're fairly convinced that these paintings were part of a ritual which included music, because we found musical instruments as well, flutes, okay? So in other words, we think that these paintings are like Göbekli Tepe, which is like maybe now and then these hunter-gatherers would come into this cave for a religious festival where there's music, dancing, okay? And they are watching these paintings together. So these paintings are part of a religious festival. In other words, these paintings are not about art. It's really about religion. It's expressing the religious beliefs of the people at that time. Okay? So does this make sense, guys? All right. Yes? Okay, so I'm going to answer the question, what are the beliefs right now, okay? All right. So again, no one knows what their beliefs are because they wrote nothing down, okay? They are pre-literate. We can't go back in time and talk to them, okay? So we have to use our imagination. So let's imagine that we go back in time to this time. It's very cold, and our memories have been wiped out, meaning like we've lost the knowledge of today. We've lost science. We've lost what we learned in biology class, okay? So my first question is, we're in this world, and what are things that amaze us or make us wonder or make us in awe? What are things that capture our imagination, okay? Meaning like we see these things and we're like, oh my God, God must exist because there's no way I can explain what happened. What are these things that we would see and we would be surprised by, marvel at, basically be in awe of? What are things about our life that amazes us? What's the first thing that we can think of? What's the first thing? You're in this world, right? Use your imagination. What's one thing that's like, oh, okay, there must be a God, or there must be some supernatural powers that govern our world? What's the first thing that comes to mind? How about childbirth? Childbirth, right? Does that make sense to you guys? Because I'm a father, I have 3 kids. And I can tell you, when I first saw my child being born, I was amazed. Because you have this life come out of nothing, right? Okay, and if you never study biology, you can't explain what happened. So that's the first thing that amazes us about being human, childbirth, right? What's the second thing that would amaze you if you were back here? Yeah? Child growing up, okay, so child growing up, yes. What else? How about, yeah? Okay, how about the stars, right? It's late at night, and remember, there's no pollution. So you see out into the darkness, and it's all stars glowing, right? That's pretty amazing. So what do you think these stars are? You're staring out into outer space, right? And you see these stars glowing brightly in the sky. What are they? What's your explanation, really? Excuse me? Okay, possibly, okay? Possibly souls or other worlds, okay? Planets, worlds. In other words, the first thing that you recognize is that our world is just one of many worlds out there. Does that make sense? All right? What else amazes you about the world? Excuse me? Okay, recovery from disease. Okay, so healing. Right? How do you explain healing then? What thoughts save you? Oh, the gods save you. Okay. All right, yeah, okay. So there are some supernatural powers. But another way to explain healing, okay, is that you have a body and you have a soul, right? And the soul could be one of the stars. So what's causing disease in this world is the soul and the body are in conflict. And so healing is about bringing the soul and the body aligned together, okay? And we think this because look at Chinese medicine, right? It's the same idea, right? Where the soul and the body are in conflict, right? And you want to align the two in order to heal. Okay? So other things that will surprise you is nature, right? The animals, the trees, the vastness of nature. Okay? Now, these are things that surprise us, and they force us to ask the question, why? So now let's try to construct a theory of how to connect all these things, okay? All right. So we know that the stars, there's other powers out there, right? There has to be gods or the soul of really great people or other planets or other worlds, okay? How does childbirth happen then? How does childbirth happen? What is the womb? It comes from the womb, right? What is the womb then? A portal, a door, right? So what the womb is a portal that the soul comes from another world into our world. Does that make sense? Then how do people return to the other world? If the womb is a portal that allows souls to come into our world, how do these souls return to their world again? But what do they do in death? How do we, so people die and then? Burial, thank you. Do you understand? So this is symmetry, right? The soul comes into our world from the mother's womb, from darkness, and then for us to return the soul back into the original world, we bury this person in darkness, and that carries that person back to the original world. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so this is probably the simplest explanation for how life and death works. Okay? All right, so there are these portals, okay? And what in nature most resembles a womb? What in nature most resembles a womb? A mother's womb. Like a cave, right? Do you understand? A cave. So we can think that, okay, we humans come from a mother's womb, which is a cave, right? A tunnel. But animals also come from a womb, which is a cave, okay? So the cave is a portal into another world. So why are we in the cave celebrating animals? Why are we doing that? Why are we in a cave celebrating animals? What are we really doing? We respect what? We respect their soul. And what else are we doing? Because, and why are we respecting their soul? Yeah, we kill them, right? So we kill them, and now what are we trying to do? Let them forgive us, but what else are we really trying to do? Once we eat them, what must we do now? Excuse me? Yes, bring them back, right? Do you understand? So when we kill them, we think they go back into the spirit world, right? So now we have to summon them back from the spirit world into our world. Okay? Does that make sense? So, in other words, what this religion, what this belief is really saying is that we are all interconnected. And for every action that we make, we have to do something else to compensate for action, okay? So if we kill an animal to eat the meat, then we need to ask forgiveness and then bring this animal back into the spirit world to maintain balance and harmony in nature. Does that make sense, guys? Okay? So, why is it in this world there's balance and harmony? Why do we think there's balance and harmony? Because what gives life to everything? What's the force that gives life to everything? The mother goddess, right? Mother Nature. Okay? And so if we think that there's one force, the mother goddess, that gives life to everything, that means that for us, trees, animals, us, are all equal. We're all the children of Mother Nature. We all have souls, okay? And so what gives us permission to kill other animals? Why are we allowed to kill other animals? The other animals are our brothers and sisters, right? So what gives us permission to kill the other animals? Why are we allowed to do so? Okay, because Mother Nature, Mother Goddess has a plan, okay? Each thing on this planet has a function. The function is to maintain balance and harmony. If we do not kill the other animals, we will die, okay? But also, if we don't kill the other animals, there'll be too many of them. You understand? So, in other words, the world is a cycle. It's a circle. And each person, each animal has a part to play in this. And as long as we play our part, then the world will be harmonious and balanced and perfect, okay? Does that make sense? Okay? Does that make sense, guys? Okay. So, we have actually a word for this religion. And this word is animism, okay? Animism. And what animism is, it's probably the first religion, okay? And it's a belief that each living thing, whether it's a tree, a mosquito, a person, or anything that's living, has a soul. Okay? And we're all interconnected because we all have souls. And so we must maintain balance and harmony. And so many of the primitive religions, okay, if you go to talk to native people in North America and South America and Australia, they all have this belief. But also there are many religions such as Buddhism, which also has this belief. Okay, and we believe that this is the first religion. Okay, so let's go over some evidence that this is in fact what they believed. Okay, so a recent discovery that we made is that trees talk to each other. Do you guys know this? So what happens is that trees, there are maybe thousands of trees in a forest, and their roots are connected through mushrooms, through fungi. And this allows them to share information. So for example, what we know is that if one tree in one part of the forest lacks nutrients like water, okay, the other trees will send nutrients to that tree. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's almost like the forest is one big brain or one big living organism, and they're all trying to communicate with each other. Another thing that we've discovered is that if there are pests or insects that attack one tree, okay, this tree will automatically communicate to the other trees, and these trees will start to prepare for the pest or the attack, okay? And the third thing, which is the most interesting, is that trees will recognize their own children. So if the children, these children trees, need nutrients, the mother trees will send the nutrients to the children right away. Okay, does that make sense? So this is something that we've recently discovered, but if you think about it, if you're living back then, you can sense the you can sense almost how trees communicate because you're always in touch with nature. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. This is a cave painting, and you can see that these animals, okay, gazelles, they're going somewhere. And there are two beings here, okay? We believe that these two beings represent the mother goddess because as we discussed last class, the mother goddess comes in the form of a bird, right? The bird flies around the sky is the mother goddess. Okay, so it's almost like the mother goddess is channeling or herding the animals from the spirit world back into her own world. What you also notice is that these birds are almost like humans, okay? And so what we think is that the shamans dress up like birds in order to channel the energy of the mother goddess to control the animals, okay? Okay, and there's actually a lot of evidence for this. So this is clearly an animal, but this is also a person who's an animal, who's a human being, right? Because of the figure. So these are human being shamans who dress up like animals in order to better communicate with animals, but also to better communicate with the spirit world, okay? Okay, and this is actually a more clearer picture of shamans trying to access the spirit world. Okay, are we clear so far? So from this religion, we can guess that the people back then were extremely compassionate. they believe that everything has a soul and every life is precious. Okay? And one evidence for this is this. This is a skeleton. What's interesting about the skeleton is that it's a dwarf, okay? So there are some humans back then who are born with diseases or handicaps or physical deformities. This person is a dwarf. Now, this is interesting because dwarfs aren't able to contribute that much to your community, right? So as a hunter-gatherer, you need to hunt together to access meat, to get meat, to feed everyone. If you're a dwarf, you're not really doing that much. So in theory, because it's such a harsh life, being a hunter-gatherer, you would think that they would discard the dwarf, kill the dwarf, or maybe leave the dwarf behind, okay? But from DNA analysis, what we know is this. This skeleton, okay, this person had the same amount of food, the same quality of food as everyone else. Meaning that even though this person was not contributing to the community, everyone worked hard to make sure this person was treated well and was fed as well as everyone else. And at the end of this person's life, he was granted an elaborate burial, okay? And we know this from the archaeological research, yeah? Yeah, okay. Okay, does that make sense, guys? All right, so let me ask you this question. Let's make the assumption that he was, in fact, contributing to the community. How could he contribute to the community? How? They clearly thought he was special, but what made him special? If you're a dwarf, you can't hunt, but what can you do? To me? Okay, okay, but what else can you do besides food? Why would they think he was a special person? What could he do that others couldn't do? Yeah?
Maybe like do paintings or other religious acts.
Thank you. Okay. So maybe the religion back then is that everyone is special. Everyone's the same, right? So if you're different, it doesn't mean you're less special. It means you're more special. It means that the mother goddess has given you a special power. And maybe this power is to communicate with the spirit world, okay? So maybe the cave paintings, as you say, were done by people like this, who were in a constant state of meditation with the spirit world. And that's what inspired him to create the cave paintings, okay? Because clearly, if you look at the cave paintings, they were done by a special mind. And if you're a dwarf, you clearly see the world in a different way. And being a dwarf, it makes the most sense to be a shaman, not only because people think you're special, but because you can invest the time into meditation, into religious practice that enables you to communicate with the spirit world, okay? Does that make sense?